Now let's talk about the return policy, because you are going to be creating a return policy when starting your online business. Customers look for that.
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment. Now come on now.
What's up, icons? It's the iconic fashion figure. And today we're going to be talking about how to create a customer-friendly return policy for your online boutique. Now, you guys know I'm one of those people that already say that the customer is not always right, but we want to do what we can to accommodate our customers when needed. And a return policy is usually one of those accommodations we have to make for customers. Now, I will say return policies aren't required. It's not like a legal thing that you have to have one, but running a professional business, I recommend having a return policy. So first, I'm going to run through some things you'll want to include in your return policy. Now, some of you may say that you're just not doing any returns at all, everything's final sell. That's okay. Just make sure you establish that somewhere on your website as your return policy that you don't accept returns. You want to have that somewhere on your website so customers know that before they make a purchase, because the return policy for customers can be a determining factor if they actually buy or not. So make sure you have a return policy somewhere stating that you don't accept returns at all. Now, for those of you that will be accepting returns, here are the things that I recommend including in your return policy. The number one thing you want to make sure is visible in your return policy and is very clear is how long does a customer have to return the item? Are you going to give them 1 week from the date that they received their order? Is it going to be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a whole year? Or is there no cutoff time? You want to make sure to specify that in your return policy how long they have. Now, I can't sit here and tell you exactly how long you should tell your customers or what is right, because there's no right or wrong answer to this. You just have to do what's best for your business, but we'll get more into that in a moment. Make sure you specify the condition of the items that you will accept back. Will you take back used items, or does it have to be unworn, untampered with, unaltered? Does it have to have the original tags on it? Those type of things. Make sure you specify the condition that you're willing to accept back, and make sure it's clear for your customers to understand as well. The third thing you'll want to make sure you include in your return policy is the type of refund that the customers will receive once you process the return. So is a refund going back to the original form of payment? Is it going back to store credit? Do you do even exchanges only, or does the customer have the option of any of those options that you list on your return policy? Make sure your return policy states the type of refund they'll be receiving, because that can also be a determining factor for customers. They might not even bother returning if they know it has to be exchange only, or they might not even buy at all if they know they can't get their money back. If they do send it back, it has to be store credit or even exchange. The next thing you'll want to make clear on is like sell items. Are you accepting returns on items that have been marked down, or are those final sell? You also want to think about like swimwear or undergarments, lingerie, those type of things. A lot of companies usually won't take those back. Is your company allowing returns on those items, or those items final sell? Another thing you'll want to include is the return shipping. Does your customer have to pay for the return shipping, or are you paying for the return shipping for an item? Also think about if you're doing exchanges, you have the shipping for the item that's being returned as well as the shipping of the new item that you're shipping out. Who's footing the bill for that shipping when a return is being processed? Is the customer liable for it all? Are you liable for it all, or is there going to be a split? And that last thing I would recommend to make sure you include in your return policy is how the return process or the exchange process works. Do they have to call to process a return? Can they email? Can customers process the returns on their own directly on your website, like on Amazon? Do they have to drop off the item to return it back to you, ship it back? Make sure you're clear on the steps and how long this process can take. So let's say once they send it back, it can take you a week to process it and maybe another week for them to get their money back, or that 1 week would be the processing plus the charge being posted back to their original form of payment. Those type of things. Make sure you're very precise on how that process works so customers know the proper steps to take to submit a return. Now I'll go into some tips that I can give to you for creating your customer-friendly return policy. And again, this is going to be based off your business needs, so I can't tell you exactly what to do for your return policy. You have to do what's best for you, but I can certainly give you tips on creating that return policy. And of course, that first tip is to use a return window that works for your product. So some of you may have seasonless products where that means you can sell it year round. So you might be able to offer a longer return window for your item, or some of you may be selling seasonal items that you can't sell year round. So you might have a shorter time frame for your returns. For example, you sell swimwear, but you're in a northern state that gets cold. So really you only sell swimwear during the summer months. So you might only accept returns within a week or within 30 days because you need to be able to turn around and resell that. And of course, that's if you accept returns on swimwear. I'm just throwing out a seasonal item that might have a shorter lifespan and you might not be able to give a longer return window. Tip number 2 that I can give you is to determine where your returns are going to go. When you have product coming in and out, it can get confusing for the people that are handling your shipping, whether it's yourself or someone else, because you might have product coming in that's new product and you don't want to get it mixed up with returns that customers are sending back as well. So how are you going to differentiate the products that are yours that you are sending out or being sent into you for like new inventory or supplies versus customers' returns? Are you going to use a different address? For example, I have a separate address that I'll use where I have my returns going to. Actually, some companies do that. They have certain fulfillment centers that they have returns going to. Are you going to have customers include those RMA labels inside their boxes? That way, when you open the box, you know immediately once you see that label, this is a return and it needs to be processed as a return. When you're creating that policy, if you're using RMA labels, make sure you specify that they must include that label in the box so that way it doesn't cause delays on their returns. Because without that label, you now got to figure out what this box is and who it belongs to before you can even process the return. Tip number 3 I can give you when creating that return policy, because you also want to include this in the policy, is to determine how you're going to handle denied returns. So let's say your return policy says that the products being returned has to be in new condition, cannot be worn, cannot be altered, washed, none of that. It has to be in new condition with the tags. Now, what do you do if you receive a return that has been worn? You can smell the perfume or the body odor on the garments. The tags are missing after your policy states that it has to have the tags attached to it. The product has been damaged, they ripped it, and you know for a fact when you sent it, it was not ripped. What are you going to do with those returns that are now denied because they go against your return policy? You have to think about, of course, contacting the customer, letting them know you cannot accept that return. But now, are you sending that product back to the customer because this is something that they're paid for and you're not giving them the money back? Does the customer have to pay to get their product back now that they've sent it to you? Do you maybe not give them full credit for it and you only give partial since it's damaged? So it's kind of like you guys are splitting the loss. Do you only give store credit for them to be able to buy something else but not refund the original form of payment? You have to think about all those things when creating the return policy, because those are things that are going to happen. You're going to have customers that even though they know your policy states new condition only, they're going to send you used product and see if they can get their money back anyway. So how do you handle those returns? Tip number 4 when creating that customer-friendly return policy is think about your sales tax schedule. Now, every state is going to be different on this one. Some states have you file quarterly, some monthly, some annually. Now, when you're doing those filings, because you have to report the sales tax that customers paid and you have to pay that sales tax over to your state, how are you going to handle that if a customer sends back a return but you've already paid the sales tax to your state? Now you have to deal with reconciling that with your state to get the money back that you've paid to them that you now have to refund to your customer, because you have to refund them back the sales tax that they paid if you're accepting a return. So how do you want to go about that? Are you going to be the one that takes the temporary loss until the state refunds you back the money that you paid them for an order that you've now returned? Check with your state how they handle that as well. Or some companies just avoid returns altogether so they don't have to deal with things like this. They'll say final sell because they don't want to have to deal with it. Or they might give a shorter time frame. It has to be returned within 3 to 7 business days to try to avoid falling into that bracket of having a return that you've already paid sales tax on. Those are things to consider. One of those things that you might not think about when creating a return policy. Tip number 5 is to think about those seasonal returns. For example, holiday return. A lot of companies extend the return window when it comes to holiday returns returns, since a lot of people are buying gifts that they might not give for a few weeks, and then that person that receives it might miss that window, that time frame to return. So are you going to extend your return policy for holiday season? Are holiday items non-returnable? That's something you want to consider when creating your return policy. Tip number 6 I can give you is when you're creating that return policy, kind of have that in mind when you're pricing your products. And the reason I say that is because a lot of companies, when they price their products, they always price with the mindset that an item might be returned. And they typically will add on to their pricing to combat those returns so that they're not taking a loss. So you might increase a product's price by like 2 to 3% of that price to cover any returns that you might receive, so you're not taking losses, because sometimes you might get items that you can't resell and you're taking a loss in that item. Or you might have to mark down an item that has been returned because now it's an older item out of season, or simply because it's been in someone else's hands and you don't want to sell it at full price anymore. You're just going to mark it down and resell it. You might want to think about that when pricing your items with that original pricing. And the last tip, and one of my very own personal tips that I take to heart, is to be clear about your return policies. I'm one of those people that like to be very transparent with my customers, at least as transparent as I can be. So I try to be clear about my policies with my company, but there are some companies out there that are not clear at all, and honestly I avoid them if they're not clear on their policies, because my money is my money and I don't play about my money. So if I get something that I don't like and your policy is not clear on whether or not I can return it, I'm going to avoid buying from you, because I need to know, can I get my money back if things aren't going to work out, or am I going to take a loss? And am I okay with taking such loss? Like, is it a low amount where I'm okay with taking that loss? Or am I paying a huge amount of money, like thousands of dollars on an item, and its final sell? Now I need to really research and think about, do I want to buy it before I do? So be clear on your policies, because that will help customers out. That'll save you the headache too, from dealing with upset customers when they can't get what it is they want because your policy wasn't clear from the get-go. And you guys know I just recently did a video on that from another company that I was experiencing that with. I didn't name the company, but I was just saying how their policy wasn't clear and how so many customers were frustrated. If you haven't checked that out, I'll definitely link that. But I recommend being very clear on your policy if you can. Now, if you are one of those people that, you know, aren't good with writing out your policies, just like with those product descriptions that I was talking about in the previous video, there are tools out there that can help you to create your return policy. For example, Shopify has a return policy generator that you can use, which I'll link down in the description box if you guys want to use that to help you to at least get that starting point with creating your return policy, as well as Canva's AI that I was talking about. Use that to help create your return policy as well. But that's it for this week's Back to the Basics on starting your online business. If you haven't seen the beginning parts of the Back to the Basics and starting your online business, I'll link those down in the description box as well, so you guys can check out those previous videos. But this is just one of those things we need to do when starting an online business, and I know a lot of you will get stuck on it or keep it very brief because you don't know exactly what to include in your return policy. So now you have it. Here's things to include in your customer-friendly return policy, as well as some tips when creating that return policy. Thank you guys for watching.